Not only do you have a black friend, but a black friend who's giving you jewelry that you can wear.
Then we're not married then, are we? I know that's what happens.
No.
That happens in prison, but not in real life. We're defined by what we overcome, not by what we were given. In a lot of cases, it's if you don't know what to do, knowing what not to do is probably more valuable than knowing what to do, because knowing what not to do keeps you from losing limbs or, heads or eyes or something along those ideas. You can then determine something else. So. Shadow and light. It's something that happens in the stair pit zone. Hi, we're back. Kind of shocking. You're back too. Even more shocking. Just shows to what happens when you have no meaning or purpose in your life. You'll watch people talk to you on screen. Max is also with me today.
Great to be here, sir.
It's a pleasure to see you.
Absolutely a pleasure to see you as well. I see you're back in your nice press suit.
Yes, I try to look professional.
One of us needs to.
If it hurts, that's what it comes
Absolutely.
down to. No.
Yes.
I mean, I've got a shtick. I'm playing my part. That's the important part.
Yes.
Throughout life, I mean, Shakespeare said it better than most, which is, an actor plays many parts in his life. The other answer is you have to do what you have to do in order to eat, but that doesn't really mean anything to anybody.
Absolutely. And what is the old saying? Pain is beauty, right?
Sure,
or beauty is pain, whichever way you want to frame it.
Right.
You're looking dapper today,
oh, no,
sir.
Totally pain.
And I mean, I'm sure it's a little painful sitting in the suit.
Yeah, it's a little bit different on it. When I used to play basketball, after my mother died, I took over the custodial care and feeding of my brothers and my half-brothers, I should say, just to make sure that the lineage is right so they don't try to ever lay claim to any of my assets.
Absolutely.
I can't stand just the idea of them leeching off me and just infuriates me. So I did take over the custodial care and feeding of them. And I used to go to play basketball with my younger brothers, wound up being a pretty good basketball player. And one day, after I got done playing, I had come from work where I was wearing a suit, and I was putting my suit back on after I got done playing basketball. And this guy who was probably my age now, but he seemed old and feeble at the time, unlike as old and feeble as I might be today. But he started talking to me about how wonderful my children were. And I'm thinking, I don't have any children, and why are you talking to me? It's really embarrassing. And so the more he talked, the more I recognized that when I was wearing a suit, I looked like my own father.
Wow.
And that he couldn't believe me as a kid as a young adult, wearing shorts and, whatever the current shoe of age was, and, a rock and roll T-shirt on it, would look one age, and then somebody in a suit would look old enough to be your own father. It was kind of bizarre. So I showed him that, in fact, I was the person that he was talking to. He said, I'm so embarrassed. I'm sorry. No, it's cool.
Yes.
It's kind of what it is. So I think that today what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to separate podcast me versus real me, so that this way I have a natural protection between me and what I'm trying to do. So in case nobody ever watches this, I can blame it on the suit and you.
Yes.
Versus taking any responsibility for it.
Absolutely. Deflect, right?
It's always someone else's fault.
And that's also kind of a nod to how your entire life has gone in general, which is a nod to how quickly you've had to grow up, right? For someone old and feeble, as you say, but to recognize you as your half-brother's father rather than, just another sibling, again, kind of speaks to the book and everything else about how quickly you had to grow up with the circumstances you were put in.
I wanted to do it right. Say, what did you say? But I'm not going to play the old card here. It's a cheap laugh. I'm not going to.
You don't even have hearing aids in yet, so you're doing pretty good.
Well, I just don't pay attention. If I had them, I would turn them off so I wouldn't listen to people.
Gotcha.
In fact, most of the time when I walk around with my headsets in. And that way, if someone tries to talk to me, I just point at them and go like this, and then kind of, sorry. Then no one has to talk to me. It's a great way. Before, I just had to pretend that I didn't hear them or not speak English to them.
Yes.
which is my other great gift.
That was a good one.
Have I ever shown you that?
Yes, I've seen that one.
Quite good, yeah. This is the secret to, for those of you weighing at home, go ahead and ask me a question.
Hey, Robert, how are you doing today, sir?
Ça fait le café, bro. Qu'est-ce café, bro? It's perfect.
Ends the conversation quickly.
Just ends right there.
Absolutely.
One of my friends growing up, Dave, when we were in an age where I guess we could drive, we would go to restaurants, and part of the game was Dave wouldn't speak much, but he could be very, very quiet. And we wouldn't speak English to the waiter. Did I ever tell you this?
Yes.
Yeah. So we would go into there and they'd say, "What do you want?" And and the waiter would, what? And then eventually I'd get them to bring me paper, and I would draw like a head and 4 legs, and then they wouldn't say anything, and then I would look at them like, "Mmm." And they would bring us a steak or a hamburger. And to this day, I kind of crack up, and I feel sorry for all the poor waiters that went through it.
Oh, yeah.
But here are 2 kids, like a glorified Sizzler or something like that, some restaurant that might have a steak, but it's not any good, but they would bring us to it. Then we would eat it, and it would be great. Then we would leave. The thing that was cracked me up about that was, for not speaking English, whenever they got the word right, we would nod our heads.
Yes.
So there's that a certain.
Yeah, at least give them some hints there.
Yeah,
so,
something's pretty good.
And I know you guys that are listening on audio can't see us, but for those of you watching on video, again, Robert is dressed how he is dressed. I am dressed how I am dressed. And one of these days, I think you and I need to switch wardrobes. Right. I do own a couple suits.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I will say I do have a couple collecting mothballs and dust in the closet.
Right. Yeah.
All right. And then I can lend you a chain or two, and you can come some of your street clothes. We can swap out one day.
I'd have street cred then.
Yes, 100%.
That's what I would look for.
Not only do you have a black friend, but a black friend who's giving you jewelry that you can wear.
Then we're not married, then, are we? I know that's what happens.
No.
That happens in prison, but not in real life. I just didn't know how it would work.
Yeah. No, we'll avoid that side. So,
you have to protect me.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's jump into Stair Pits.
Sure.
Okay, let's get right into the book here that R.A. Thompson has written. R.A. Thompson seated in this chair here for, again, those of you watching on video. Let's dive right into the first chapter.
Sure.
Okay. Let's talk about PWP. Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to explain to the people what PWP means, talk a little bit about that experience, and then also break down kind of the philosophical aspect of one of the things that is highlighted in that chapter is Thanksgiving and moving from the kids' table to the adult table, right? That is a literal movement and also a metaphorical movement that happens in life, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Since I'm going to be philosophical, I'll take out my lit cigarette. Back in the day, we didn't have electricity. It was terrible.
Yeah.
We used to dream of it. That's all we would do. Someday someone will invent something called electricity. It's an amazing time. But when it did come around, we really liked it, and I was old enough to appreciate it. It's kind of hard when you're starting a book. The hardest thing is you don't know where to start. I mean, there's just so many different things. And one of the things I often thought was one of the most bizarre things in the world was that transition point where you recognize your parents are just more than bizarre. You have confirmation of the bizarreness to your parents. And I was old enough to know how ridiculous everything was. I was old enough to be embarrassed, but I wasn't old enough yet to drive a car. So I still was in the walking around zone. But at that point, because I was a precocious early teen that knew everything that there was to know, because that's one of the cool things about being a teenager is you know that you're perfect. That was an artistic design to show that I was perfect, was to take a puff on my fake cigarette. Notice, for those of you that watched the first episode, the second episode, it's lit now. Wasn't lit before. So, and it's not actually lit. It just has red on the tip.
Improvements in the arts and crafts department.
That's really it. We focus grouped the first episode, and they said nobody liked it because the cigarette wasn't lit and they couldn't get over it. So it's still not lit, but now we can fake it. And from what I understand in post-production, they're going to put in smoke. It'll be really, really good. You guys will. This is going to be one of the highest production podcasts you've ever seen in your life. It's going to be amazing. So by all means, watch it online and listen to it. That way we get 2 views. It bumps our ratings, doesn't it? Something like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, so I'm sitting at the adult table for the first time, and it's a mercy because the children at that point have all been given up to being raised by wolves. I mean, the idea that when I grew up, you sat in a chair, with your feet on the ground, wearing pretty much what I have on right now. Gentlemen wore ties, jackets, suits, collars. We dressed as if royalty would happen, as if something special was there. And we had no money. So we were eating lettuce with condiments in between, which we referred to as like lettuce sandwiches. So a lettuce sandwich is a piece of lettuce, condiment, and then another piece of lettuce on the back side. And we might have bread at that point, and that was dinner. But here we are dressed up, just waiting for that magic moment that we would look civilized and middle class, as opposed to dirt poor living in a house that we shouldn't have lived in. So all of a sudden, here I am in the book, just trying to start out what's happening with that. You're at Thanksgiving, you're sitting with the parents, there's no prayer, there's a bunch of food. Everybody is pretty hammered, and everybody is making jokes about, which one of the women without a husband who was there with their children, who were at the other table screaming and yelling, was the horniest or the most fun when they were drunk. And there's nothing better than thinking about that when your mother is there and your mother is acting like a blushing 16-year-old girl. And all I could think about was, how fast and how far can I get away from this? That was the only thing that struck me, was that at some point the idea, the solemn nature of Thanksgiving, of being grateful for everything that you have, is now broken down to how could you copulate with somebody else and what level of teenage flirting could go on at dinner. And all I could think about was just leaving. And other people have started books much better than that. In the Beginning is a great book for Genesis. People have had great opening lines. But to me, there was a point where you kind of recognize that maybe everything they've done is wrong. Up until that point, it was hard for me to determine if what other people were doing was right or was wrong. But it became much more apparent to me that what they were doing was wrong. And I didn't necessarily know what was right, but knowing what was wrong was enough to get me to move away from that. And it's interesting when you sit down to write something, you don't know how long it's going to take to write it or where it's going to go. But I think I wrote and then rewrote the first chapter probably in maybe 7 minutes, and I couldn't believe how much fun it was. The only difficult part was at the end of writing the description of parents without partners and trying to give them a little bit of a break on it. But it was kind of this amazing feeling of having written it and thinking, well, maybe I could do this. And because I think the hardest part is just understanding, what do you say first? And I think I tried to go from the point that I recognized then that everything I'd been doing up to that point was me pretty much raising myself, but there still was this idea that I was a kid. And then at that point, I was raising myself and I wasn't a kid anymore, or that I was a lot more self-determined. And I guess the other, 275 pages that are in the first book after that are just fluff, because the only meaningful part, I think, is that moment where all of a sudden you recognize you've made that transition from helpless blob into adult. And I think in the Jewish tradition, the whole idea of a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah is a wonderful idea, because at that point you've hit 13 and all of a sudden you're an adult. That's a great gig. In the non-Jewish tradition, since the idea of going out and killing a lion or, killing an elephant or whatever else you had to previously do, kill a polar bear, those entrances into adulthood really weren't there. to me, it was that, okay, well, wow, I could leave. I mean, I didn't have to be there. I didn't have to be around the people. I guess being a kid, I stuffed my pockets with tangerines and took a Coke and just decided, well, I'll just walk home. And during that point, it was, I think, like one of the happiest points of my young life was because at that point I recognized, okay, I've seen enough mistakes. The rest of it just comes down to, can I do it? Can I avoid their mistakes? In a lot of cases, it's if you don't know what to do, knowing what not to do is probably more valuable than knowing what to do, because knowing what not to do keeps you from losing limbs or, heads or eyes or something along those ideas. You can then determine something else. So that was kind of the genesis of it.
At what age do you feel like you had to become self-sufficient? Let's say you had to become an adult. This movement from this literal movement from the kids to the adult table, okay? And this metaphorical movement in your life from being a kid to officially being an adult. At what age, like this first chapter, when it's parents without partners, PWP, hearing these men talk about, is your mom the horniest lady in the room when she is drunk? At what age did this take place? At what age did this happen? How old were you when this happened?
Just before I had my driver's license, so about whatever you are, 13, 14, freshman year in high school, sophomore year in high school.
Wow.
So it was at an age where you just don't, trying to think of your parents as a sexual being. Here, to show the sexual being part, watch this. Sexual being. So it's like be great for a commercial there. But the thinking of your parents as being sexual is never a particularly comfortable idea. But then kind of having it thrown in your face and watching my mother giggle like she's a 15-year-old girl or something like that, all I could think about was, man, how quickly can I get away from this? And it was, I don't know, it was just a real weird feeling. It really was. But I knew I had to leave. And then I think when I finally did wind up moving out, like I was 16, as soon as I had a car, I moved out. Because then I could move around. I didn't need them anymore.
You said that the hardest part about writing this book was the beginning of it, right? That first chapter. I was going to ask, was it harder to write the beginning or the end? It sounds like it was writing the beginning, right?
The rest of the story, I kind of know. I was there for most of it. So yeah. Because there for all of it. That's kind of a joke. I was wondering if you would laugh on that.
Absolutely.
You got to work on it. We'll try that again. I was there for most of it. Much more realistic.
There you go. Yes.
That's much better. You need to watch tape of Ed McMahon. When I say something even remotely funny, you have to laugh. And then when I want you to stop laughing, I'll just put the cigarette in.
Well, I think what we need is kind of the laughter sign.
Oh, right.
That can click on here in the back, and then I can,
we can dub it. Post-production. We'll get laughter, or we could have like seals going like
or
this.
Really, we should film this in front of a live studio audience.
Oh no, yeah.
I think that.
Oh no, that would be much better, because then everything gets much jokier. It'd be
yes,
worse. But
then at this point, it would just turn into a comedy show.
Oh no,
you
that's
and I
really
would
what
just
it'd be.
Try and trade jokes and see how many laughs we could actually get.
So, but yeah, I think that you don't really know kind of where to start. I think that's the wholest part. It's like, what's the first thing that you do? And you kind of start in the middle and then work your way a little bit back and then ease into the beginning and come forward. And a lot of the first book is things that I have real vivid memories of, and then things that I learned from my parents and others going through it. When my father mercifully was able to find salvation in Alcoholics Anonymous, and one of the great blessings in my life and in his, and he was able to reach a level of sobriety that he never had. So when he was making amends to me or telling me about the things that were wrong, a lot of the early story things are things that I have very little recollection of, but I just learned from my father's attempts to make amends to me, and then things that I learned from my mother at different points of sobriety, and then my own personal remembrances. So much of the weird things that happened, my parents were incredibly poorly matched to ever have been married. They were ill-suited to be parents. They were ill-suited to be anything other than teenagers. And as a result, it was kind of that idea that if there's a contrast in it, it would be when I became a teenager, I felt like fending for myself, and having to fend for myself was the single most important thing that I could do, versus my parents, when they became sexually aware, that became the defining characteristic of their lives for the next 35, 40 years. And then, well, not my mother didn't live that long, for the next probably 25 years of my mother's life. That was the defining characteristic of her life. And so just kind of a different idea. I mean, it really was. It was kind of a weird thing. But I do remember that as one of the moments where, what I was thankful for that Thanksgiving was just simply walking away. The fact that I had the capacity and the maturity and the willingness to just walk away. I didn't need to be there.
Correct me if I'm wrong on the part of the beginning of the book, but I believe it's in the owner's manual where you talk about why you have ZZZ, why you wrote the book in the format that it's in. Okay. The one part I want to talk about is you mentioned that you have acronyms for these different people in your life. And you specifically mentioned that the reason I'm not giving these people names is because alcoholics are not humans. Okay. That might be the most cutting, deep part of the entire book. And it's before chapter 1. Okay. What made you want to take that route? From the standpoint of not only giving them acronyms, but laying out very specifically in your mind why? Because there's going to be a lot of people who read this book that are probably, post-alcoholic in their post-alcoholic life. There's going to be a lot of people who read this book that have experienced alcoholics as their loved ones, right? What made you want to describe that so vividly in people's mind that in your mind, you're like, hey, in my head, alcoholics aren't human beings and therefore they don't get names? What made you want to take that route in such a blunt format? I think it's fantastic. I think it really lays out the kind of the underlying essence of the book and the pain that you felt growing up as a kid in that environment. But what made you want to take that route when it came to the readers themselves?
I think it's one of those things that it's hard to explain what something is. It's kind of the idea that, when you teach a young person to whistle, what you do is this. To whistle, you make your lips into a tiny circle and you blow out. So the kid goes, it didn't work. Try it again. Didn't work. Try it again. I did it. It's so exciting, right? And it's that idea that it's easy to do once you know how to do it. The problem is you don't know how to do it, and people are giving you rather imprecise instructions on what it is. And when I thought of my parents, when I thought about the whole alcoholic piece, that there's an overall craziness that I didn't really recognize. My great-grandaunt in the book would go out of her way, and in life went out of her way to do everything possible for people. I mean, her entire life was about doing things for people, trying to make amends for something that she felt that she did wrong in her life. But she was going out of her way to try to be the best person that she could be and trying to make up for a sin. My parents and my stepfather had no sense whatsoever. I mean, they were free radicals in the truest possible sense. They were spoiled. They were never accountable. They never had to do anything. And if you kind of look at the stages of life, I mean, a child's life is defined by what they can do. I mean, if the kid can hold his head up, if he can move his bowels and control and move his bowels, move the bladder, then all of a sudden that's wonderful. The internal stuff is kind of working. If they can roll over, if they can walk, if they can dress themselves, if they can use a toilet, if they can speak, all those things, early childhood is what you can do, right? That's all it is. It's what you can do. Anytime you can do something, polite applause, you can do crap. Adolescence is what you can get away with. And adolescence knows what they should do. They know what they want to do. And the scale never goes this way. The scale only goes this way. And notice the symbolism or the fake cigarette on what you want to do here being bad. So it's kind of art there, unintentional, but it did happen. For those of you that are going to write a book report on this, you can say that this was a physical metaphor to the story, but it's also true. So when you're a teenager, it's what you can get away with. I mean, you know what's right, what's wrong, but you can get away with crap. And then as an adult, the transformation to adult has nothing to do with pubic hair. It has everything to do with what can you overcome? Like what happened in your life, what is wrong, and what can you overcome? Because if you can't overcome anything, then you're basically back to being a child, right? If you make excuses and you elect not to overcome it, then you're basically a glorified teenager forever. And I think that being an adult is the capacity to overcome things. It's to recognize this is a limitation, but it's only a limitation in name. I can, in fact, overcome it. And when I look at like giving my mother and stepfather and uncle and other people in it character names on it, I was just trying to think of how do I describe their interaction with the world. And that from growing up, you'd like see things on television, and television was nothing like the real world. And the real world was nothing like my world. So how do you take these people that are things, but they're not playing the role that they should be playing? So as a result, I just had to have just a way of being able to look at it. And it occurred to me one day that my mother was kind of sleepwalking her way through her life. And back in the day of comic strips, you'd have ZZZ as the idea that someone was sleeping, like I was sleeping.
Back in the day of what?
Cartoons, like just single panel cartoons. When someone was sleeping, their head would be like this, and then above it would be ZZZ. In post-production, we'll do this just so you'll know what it is.
I was going to say, so a lot of people from my generation might not understand comic books or panel cartoons. You know, just wanted to show the generation gap.
Right. Yeah. Well, cartoons were like cars that could sing. Cartoon.
Wow. Okay.
That's what it was about.
I like that one.
At one point, I have two half brothers, and at one point, I told my middle half brother that he had asked the question of why something, like why oranges were orange. And I told them that color wasn't invented until 1965. Did I ever tell you this?
No.
So I told them that color wasn't invented until 1965. And when they invented color, everybody had a vote as to what color things would be. And some people elected to be, black or brown, and some people elected to be white, and that we had a vote and the sky was going to be blue and trees were going to be green and blah, 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 blah. So, and like my brother was 17, so he didn't know anything. No, he was probably in maybe first or second grade. Been funny if he'd been 17.
Yeah.
Today you could get away with it, 17-year-olds, but back then they were a little bit smarter. So I told David this, and David is like, okay, that's great. So David's in school a couple of days later, and somebody said, why is the sky blue? And David puts up his hand and said that color wasn't invented until 1965.
Wow.
And that we invented it at that point, and that's how the whole thing went down.
Yeah.
And the teacher is telling him no, and he's saying, no, my brother told me that that's how it went. And some people elected to be black, and some people elected to be brown, and that's the way it was. And we just voted on it. So David refused to believe that it was.
It sounds like you would have been fantastic at homeschooling.
Oh, it would have been really good.
Just teaching some little different philosophies and what you would learn in the normal everyday education system.
So anyways, David got sent home for telling the teachers that they didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And my mom got really pissed, and she's yelling at me that I shouldn't tell the kids those things. I thought, well, I mean, here's the answer. It's pretty funny. It might not be true, but
Absolutely.
It was funny. And then the funny thing about it was years later, the strip Calvin and Hobbes had a similar piece.
Yes.
And my youngest brother and I felt that entire strip was written by somebody that lived in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because too many of the things that I did to my brothers came up in that strip. But where the whole thing about my mother was, it just seemed to me like she was just sleepwalking through her life. And I thought, well, I could just put down ZZZ until I come up with something better. And then the second that I, hit capital ZZZ, it's like, this is perfect. And then it was like, well, what do I name my stepfather? And it was like, well, why was he there? And then obviously, why? Okay, well, that's perfect. And my biological family, like, where were you, was kind of like his whole story. My father discovered drinking at a very young age and became very proficient at it. And so, like, where were you? WWW became perfect for him. And then other people just wound up with their own little abbreviations, and they made perfect sense to me. And I think it also takes them into that space of, if you look at them as just three letters, what are you seeing? I mean, you're seeing something that is just, it's just an enzyme. An enzyme, for those of you that didn't study science, but an enzyme is something that will enact a change on something else without changing itself. And that's what my mother and stepfather were, by and large, was they would go about doing the things that they wanted to do, independent of what anybody else said, thought, or felt. And that when they were jiving, they would get along, and when they weren't, it was just absolute misery. And I didn't really recognize how different families were, because I didn't really interact with anybody else other than them. And as my life went on, I just wanted to have nothing to do with them. I didn't want to be around them at any point. And then I developed a lot of strategies just to avoid them, which I became pretty proficient at.
I want to ask you, what was the hardest part to write in this book? Not from the standpoint of, okay, I'm not sure how to continue the story. I'm not sure. You knew exactly where you wanted the story to go. Mm-hmm. But was there a moment in time when, again, you didn't write this out with, hand, pen to paper, but when it came to putting pen to paper, metaphorically, where maybe there was a twinge of pain when it came to reliving the memory, when it came to jotting it down, when it came to putting it out there for the world to now read, was there a hardest part of this book when it came to, wow, as I'm writing this, I'm reliving it, and it's a little more painful still in your late 60s than you thought it might have been? Was there a time in writing this book that ever happened?
I think the whole thing has to be painful. If it isn't painful, you're not doing it right.
Amen.
And I think the whole thing, looking at it at certain points, like my beloved wife, when she took her maybe 4 or 5 times to make it through the book, she couldn't read it, because she would read it, she would get into it, and she would legitimately scream or swear at my parents, or how in the hell could that happen? And she, missed up and excuse herself and go to the other room, and she just couldn't read it. And at a certain point, I thought, well, this has all the commercial, appeal of a definitive study of bowel movements, that no one's ever going to bother to read this. And then when my youngest half-brother read it, he cracked up. I mean, he couldn't stop laughing at the whole time. And I recognized at that point that it was kind of a lot like my life, that I'm at one of the two ends of the scale. I do nothing inside the bell curve. I mean, you've known me for a little bit of time. There's very little that I do that falls into the 67% of stuff that other people do. Either I don't do it at all, or I'm really, really good at it, and there's nothing in between. And to me, writing the book, if it didn't hurt, I needed to stop and make it hurt. And then the only way of making it hurt was to making it funny. You know, you had to take it and turn it into how ridiculous is this versus how painful it is. And the difference is, it goes back to, I think I might have said it in the previous version, this comes back to the Charlie Chaplin line, that comedy is shot in a long shot and tragedy is shot up close. And so if you look at a lot of the focal points in the book, the closer it gets, the more it hurts, and the more abstract it gets, the funnier it is. And it's the same shot. It just depends upon where's the focal point. What are you trying to show? And so it should all be tragic, and it should all be funny. It just depends upon, you know, how do you see it? What focal point are you at? Let me ask you this, man. You've read it, and you've known me for a little bit on it. Were there parts in it that you were reading that you were shaking your head, that you were laughing, or you're thinking like, you know, oh, holy crap, what is this? I mean, tell me something that when you were looking at, what were some of your thoughts on it?
Yes, all the above, absolutely, especially because I know you and we've been friends for years now. There were moments where you sit there and you shake your head and you wonder, one, how could a parent do that to a child? And also, how could a child endure and survive this? Right? That has to take some hard-nosed, a lot of will to overcome a bad situation, right? We always talk about nature versus nurture, right? And how you're able to, and like we talked about in the last episode, you're able to overcome your circumstances and become what you want in life and still be successful, right? There are times, maybe it's because I know you, that I see the humor between the lines, right? There aren't many outright just funny laughing moments, jokes, things like that. But if you look between the lines of what you're saying, it can be viewed as funny, right? It can be viewed as kind of a little bit of dark humor, or like you said, you can see the pain, or you can see the funny moments within the pain, right? Or that you want this pain to be viewed through a lens of mild comedy, if you will, right? And then, of course, there's times where you almost wonder, is this kid going to make it, right? How did this kid turn out? It's amazing that we're able to sit here today and do this podcast. How old are you, Robert?
67.
You're 67. I'm 28. And the fact that we're able to sit here and do this podcast and people are able to not only listen, but also see how you turned out after reading this book, because if you were to write this book, you would wonder, how the hell did this guy turn out as an adult? What is he like now based on all that he went through as a child? And the fact we're able to sit here in a dapper suit, as we have talked about, and still break down kind of your life, your story, and how successful of a human being that you have been, which we will, of course, get into in other podcasts as well, as to what has happened post this book. But it's amazing just to see that concept as well of because people are going to read this and wonder, whatever happened to this guy? Did he end up taking his own life? Did he end up a bum in the streets? Did he end up an alcoholic like his parents, because that was a learned trait? And the fact that you sit here today and the man that you are, the cognizant man that you are, is very impressive.
You're being very kind, and using big words like that is one of the reasons why you want to go to colleges like Utah Tech, because you too will learn to use big words like that. Just kids at home, write that down. Utah Tech University here in St. George, Utah. It's where you learn big words. No, I think it is one of those things that we're defined by what we overcome, not by what we were given. because people can be given any number of things and it doesn't mean anything. I mean, Shaquille O'Neal, as a modern philosopher, was told one of his kids that, he's rich, they're not. Other people have said, I'm rich, get out there and just do it yourself, make your own fortune. But I think that there's a lot of truth in that. When you reach a certain phase in your life, like one of the examples that I've used with people that I've tried to employ and try to do things, one of the first things that I like to ask somebody is, when you go to the bathroom, do you use a toilet, or do you just wander off, or do you just, go all over yourself? And they'll generally laugh and they'll say, well, I use a toilet. And I'll say, great. So you know what's right and you know what's wrong. So I don't have to teach you that. Okay, so the answer is we all know what's right and we all know what's wrong. And the question is, on our behavioral compass, how often does that needle point towards R for right versus, oops, or forgive me, or I didn't mean to. And the fact that that's such an issue in the world that there's the magnificent phrase, and sadly I kind of live by it, which is it's much easier to get forgiveness than it is to get permission.
Amen.
And in most of the things that I've done, it's never occurred to me to get permission, because by the time I try to bring somebody up to speed, the opportunity is lost. And so as a result, just do it. And you can get forgiveness afterwards, or you can pay the fine, or you can do whatever it is that you want to do. But I think that the idea of, whether you say, you hold the door open for somebody or you close it, whether you tell somebody hello or you tell them get out of my way, it's up to you on how you choose to interact with people. And it's up to you to determine how they interact with you as to, what your response is going to be. And if everybody kind of can agree that we could potentially get along, then there's a great chance that we'll get along. And if we can't, then we won't. But I think it does come down to, which version do you want to be? One of the greatest pieces of modern cinema, I think, was when Cameron did Terminator 1, and the Schwarzenegger character, when he was asked a question, you'd see all of these possible things, and he's going through, yes, no, maybe, get out of my way, and F off. And he's scrolling down and he goes to F off. And virtually every answer that he give would be F off. And part of that is that Schwarzenegger can't act, and those was one of the words he could say. And there's nothing better than, off, is pretty good, because it's nothing funnier than watching Austrians not be able to speak proper English. So when I think about the world, that's kind of the way I look at it. Is it's like a multiple choice question in school. What answer are you going to take? You can make it better and you can make it worse. And, to quote Mick Jagger, like a newborn baby, it just happens every day, which is a lyric from Paint It Black. And it just depends. If you want to be involved, then be involved. And if you don't want to be involved, then don't pretend like you want to be involved when you don't want to be. Just don't be involved. There's zillions of tragedies. You can find your own tragedies to fix.
One of my all-time favorite quotes is by another author, Louis L'Amour.
Yeah.
Okay. And just paraphrasing, he basically talks about how at some point in life you have to go out and make something of yourself.
Right.
Okay. He says, only weak people blame their parents, their gender, their situation, or their race for their entire lives. Okay. You can do that for a time. You can do that as a child. But like you said, when the time comes to crossover as an adult, it's your choice. What do you make your life? You can't blame anybody else for what you become. And you are living proof of that, of how successful you have been coming from a terrible circumstance as a child.
No, thank you for that. Thank you very much. I think that it does come down to it is childhood is defined by what you can do. Adolescence is defined by what you can get away with. And adulthood is defined by what you can overcome. And if somebody can't tell you what they've overcome, it means that they're not an adult. And if they can tell you what they've gotten away with, then by all means, count your silverware when you go and don't turn your back on them, because they don't have the idea of recognizing that they could find the seed from you that would allow them to grow something better.
Last question for you today, R.A. Thompson. We've talked multiple times about your suit, and it looks fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, again, for those only listening on audio, find a way to turn on the video and catch this man in a very dapper suit. But I do have a more serious question tied to it. In the first 2 chapters, you mentioned a couple times about having to dress up to go to a not so fancy dinner,
or just any dinner
within your home.
All dinners,
right? And then that was at all dinners, and that's just in the house.
That was just in the
correct?
House, baby. That's all you did.
Yes, absolutely. So, is there any sort of pain tied to putting on a certain tie, putting on a suit, dressing up? Maybe not pain, but kind of a twinge of, I need to be on my best behavior while dressed like this because that was learned in the home? Or is it more tied to, I was a very successful businessman, this is how you dress when you are successful, this, that, and the other? Maybe a combination of both. But are there any feelings tied to, just because we've addressed the suit so many times, and it's right there in the book in the first 2 chapters, is there any feelings tied to dressing to the nines because of some of the trauma you experienced in your life as a kid, being forced to do that in an environment that might not have required it?
I think the way I kind of look at it is this. Piaget was a philosopher. I mean, he was a number of things, but I think primarily he was a philosopher more than anything else. And he said that in our lives, we play many, many different roles, and that you are defined by the number of roles that you can play. And that for a while, for me, wearing a suit was compliance. I mean, I simply had to do it, and I resented it, and I had to do it. And then it went from compliance to just the sheer ridiculousness of it. I mean, it was just so totally absurd that it was just beyond anything. And then there was a huge phase of rebellion where all I would wear was cutoffs, bare feet, and a T-shirt. And that was it. And I wouldn't wear anything else. That was what I wore. And I might wear a Speedo underneath that in case I went swimming in the summer. But other than that, that's what I wore, and I didn't care. But that's what people wore at that point. That was kind of the uniform of the day. And then as I became an adult and I started buying suits, it was kind of funny because, like, all of a sudden I'm wearing a suit, and I wore a suit when I was a kid. And I'm wondering, like in a story, you'll have the loop and then it comes back. So, like, I started wearing suits when I was like 6 or 7. And I'm thinking, man, I've got 7 years left to live. The end is going to be right here, right off the edge. Didn't work that way. But all of a sudden it occurred to me that if you can do it and you can recognize that it's silly and it's kind of ridiculous, then do it. I mean, if it makes you feel good, then that's fine. To me, I kind of view it as, if this is what I wear, this is what I'm wearing, it could be fine. I mean, I kind of laugh at it that people will look at me and, well, let me ask you this, man. Do you remember the first time you saw me in a suit?
I want to say it was at a wedding.
No.
Okay, then I don't remember.
This is why we're now going to get a divorce. I thought you would have remembered. This is why there is hatred between the races and things like this.
We've discovered it.
I give my heart to this man, and he doesn't remember. I'll get over it.
Okay.
Slowly.
Yes.
Okay.
And
no,
painfully.
Painfully, very painfully. No, it was at it was at the rewards dinner in my first year of being a mentor.
Okay.
And I wore a suit, and you had to do a double take to recognize me.
That's right. Yes. Okay.
See, that's what happens. I have magic in the relationship. He takes me for granted. But, it's the way that it works. But no, but the fact is, I do look at it. I think it's really funny. The people that know me from wearing a suit, if they see me in shorts, they don't recognize me. And people that recognize, know me from wearing a shorts can't recognize me as a suit. And to me, it's the perfect example of chameleons can change their color. Birds can puff themselves up, or animals can puff themselves up and look bigger. But it amazes me how people look at what you look like versus who you are. And to me, it's kind of a giant joke. It's like I can put this on and I look one way, and I can put something else on, I look totally different. And people they would never even remotely believe that I'm the same person. And so to me, to sit here and to, have this thing close to my face and to look at the cameras and to look at you or whatever it is, this is a simple way for me to, most people on podcasts don't bother to wear a suit. Most people don't bother to wear a tie. What the hell? I look a little bit differently. We'll try it. So to me, it's that we all have to wear costumes, and it's just one of them.
Absolutely, my man. Well, all right, Thompson, thank you so much again, sir, for letting me join you on your podcast here, Stair Pits, to kind of delve into, the different aspects of the book. We're in chapter 1 and 2, and we're able to kind of dive into the owner's manual as well. And hopefully we can, dissect this entire great piece of literature throughout the episodes.
Thank you. You don't have to suck up for me. You got the gig. That's what I'm just saying. It's nice that you're trying to pump it up there, but
thank you. Yes.
There are about 4 or 5 other guys, and they all wanted to be paid.
Yeah.
So, the answer is you got the job because you were affordable.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. And it's because I'm black, right?
That was the other thing.
Talked about.
The other thing is this. It's there. Yeah. That was it. So that was it. You had a minority hire.
100%.
And you were free. That's the whole thing. Good deal. All right. Thank you. Goodbye. Good luck. Buy low, sell high. Live by those words.